Ladies and gentlemen, foes and fans, friends and fudders, thank you for being here once again for Shy Speaks SHIB. I'm your host, Shytoshi Kusama, and today we'll be talking about something important and rather interesting: privacy, encryption, and the future of AI. As I mentioned in my last call, AI has been a hot topic for me recently, as I've delved deep into what is coming and what is possible. And we have today a pioneer in the space with us, Rand, the CEO of Zama.ai. Rand, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Shy. Hey, everyone.
My pleasure. So before we talk about Zama and about FHE, let's talk about the big picture. Where is all of this advanced AI going? So on this podcast, we've talked about culture. We've talked about community. We've talked about the idea of a nation state or a network state. And one thing that happened as we began to develop Shibarium and really this concept of Shiba as a network state is that we realized that a network state requires a certain operating system, really a modular set of technologies that enable the citizens, or in our case, Shibasins, to be able to interact intelligently with the whole. Those technologies would include things like identity, would be a very important part of that. Obviously, the ability to trade and do DeFi transactions would be rather important as well. And obviously things like voting and making intelligent decisions to govern yourselves as a unit would be very important as well. And ironically, when you look at most governments across the world, they're highly inefficient. Most situations that we find ourselves in requires tons of paperwork, even when things are done online. And I think over the next few years, and ideally next year or so, we'll begin to see the implementation of AI that makes it extremely easy to track everything, which as a result will make it easier to handle a lot of the paperwork. We've seen this one of our other partners, where it becomes extremely easy for you to create a business with just a click, and solving a lot of time and wasted that happens when we attempt to start a business. This is a huge win for entrepreneurs, and that company is Mass, one of our partners, and I'm really proud that we have them to offer you this service. But even with that, the ability to create a business very quickly, there's still a lot of components that are necessary to run a state. One of the things that we realized would be ultra important is having some level of privacy. Now, why is privacy important in a situation where everything that we do is on chain? And before we get to that answer, let me just mention that this isn't just about privacy. It's also about the ability to see what people are doing in a way that helps you avoid traps, scammers, scams, etc. This is why we created the Karma engine, which allows us to see what agents or people are doing and the karma they have acquired doing ideally good deeds on chain. But at some point, there is a necessity to have some sort of privacy, meaning if I'm going to vote for someone in a state, network state or actual state, I might not want everyone to see my vote. This is a very good example of where privacy becomes not only an idea, but actually extremely important. You need to be able to protect yourself from the outpouring or outlet, I guess you could say, backlash from doing certain things, simple as voting for someone and your spouse or your family seeing, hey, why did you vote for them? We all voted for this person, and it's on chain invisible to the world because somebody knows your wallet. This is a good example of where we realized privacy would be extremely important. And there's just one very good example, but there are plenty of use cases where privacy becomes important in a new world that is run by AI and is on chain, that combination of Web3 and AI, which we like to call Web4. Now, in this type of world, we have simple encryption that we all know and love. Military grade encryption, usually what we would hear it as. The problem with that type of encryption when we're dealing with the future is that military grade encryption is simply not as good as it used to be because of quantum computing. Quantum computing right now is kind of a secondary thought. It's just beginning to emerge as a real possibility. And we know that certain countries and certain people have this capability of quantum computing. But what happens when quantum computing becomes standard and anyone can get a quantum computer? Yeah, they'll be expensive, but you'll be able to run a quantum computer in your house. When that happens, military grade encryption becomes featherweight. You'll be able to break any password essentially because through AGI and quantum computing, the level of intelligence that you'll have at your fingertips means that you would need a new type of encryption that would ensure that the data you find most important, the data that you hold dear, is truly safe. Now, this is something to think about, right? Right now, we give tons of data to our AI, and eventually our AIs will have access to our device. But how are we going to protect that data when quantum computing becomes a thing? How are we going to protect ourselves? And for that, there is a fantastic solution. And that solution is fully homomorphic encryption. And that is why I'm so happy to have Rand on the call today to talk more about this so that we can all understand it. Because every time I've said it inside of any type of podcast or any type of X space, somebody says, wait, I need to Google that, including me a year ago when I was like, wait, what is that? And so, Rand, can you tell us a little bit about fully homomorphic encryption so that the listeners can begin to understand exactly what it is?
Hi, Shai. Thank you for this introduction. So to give you a bit of a sense of what fully homomorphic encryption, or simply FHE is, it's the ability to compute on encrypted data without having to decrypt it first. So, for example, talking about AI, today when you're using ChatGPT, you're sending your data to OpenAI that processes it and sends back a response. I mean, after all, they have to analyze it if they want to offer a service, right? On the other side, you have messaging applications like Signal, where your message is encrypted on your device and only decrypted on the recipient's device. And so the Signal servers don't actually see any of it, but they cannot do anything with the message. They can only send it to the other person. With homomorphic encryption, you can have the same end-to-end encryption as you have in messaging apps like Signal on any service, such as ChatGPT or any blockchain smart contract. The way it works is that you would send your encrypted request to ChatGPT. It wouldn't have the ability to decrypt it, but the way it was encrypted still has some special mathematical properties, which allows, adding encrypted numbers, multiplying encrypted numbers, basically computing those encrypted numbers and produce an encrypted result, which you can decrypt on your side. So for you as a user, nothing changes. You're sending a request and getting a response, but now the data is encrypted all the time, end to end, even during processing.
That's huge when you really consider the amount of data and the private nature of the data we will have to send our AIs in the near future when we begin to deal with credit cards, social security. Hey, I need to get a visa somewhere. Okay, you need all of this incredibly important private data sent to your AI so that it can do that process, or your agent, so it can do that process for you. You're going to want that data encrypted at the end of the day, because if it isn't encrypted and some problem happens in the future, and we've seen this, right? We've seen the biggest of the biggest companies get hacked and tons of data just leaks onto the dark web, including things like the credit bureaus. I think Equifax or one of them was hacked and tons of data was was lost. We've seen other hacks like even DNA data, which is a huge a problem when 23andMe was hacked, and all of that data was leaked, and now anybody who took 23andMe can be cloned in the future. What a scary situation, right? So having that data encrypted becomes ultra important. Why is it this being talked about more? Like, it's something to think about, right? You'd think this would be top of mind for everyone.
I think both of us are trying to make it top of mind for everyone. But joke aside, I think the reason why people don't know about it is first, because it's not really something people should care about, right? I think that privacy, security is something that developers should bake into their products by design so that users don't have to think about it twice. I shouldn't have to think about people seeing my, request to ChatGPT or my balances on chain because it should just be encrypted. And if it's encrypted all the time everywhere, then nobody cares anymore, not because they gave up, but because it's just done by default.
And so, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And if you want developers to do that, if you want every developer of every application, on-chain, off-chain, AI, whatever, to encrypt everything, you need two things. Three things. First, you need the technology to work. It didn't. Zama is a company that makes FHE actually work. So that's the first thing. Okay, well, the math has to work. Done. We've done that. The second thing is you want to enable developers to use this technology without being experts in cryptography, and making mistakes along the way. And so traditionally, homomorphic encryption, FHE, was way too hard to use unless you had a PhD in cryptography. We solved that as well by providing tools that developers can use. For example, Solidity libraries to build smart contracts or machine learning toolkits that integrates with your existing frameworks. So now developers have nothing to worry about or even think about. They just use it as a drop-in replacement. That's done. The third thing is performance. You want this technology to not have any overhead versus not encrypted things. And the reason why this is important is because if you look at something like AI, LLMs, ChatGPT, the cost of running those models is already so huge that even a 5 or 10% increase in compute amount would just be prohibitively expensive. And so today, I think we are with FHE at a point where it's cheap enough and fast enough for virtually every blockchain application, but it's not yet cheap enough for LLMs, which is why you don't see those AI companies talk about it. But you now see everyone in blockchain and finance and payments and identity talk about that, because we can basically run blockchains encrypted end to end. And down the line, we'll be able to run AI encrypted end to end.
Huge. That's a huge statement. Running AI encrypted end to end is a powerful concept. And I joke about it's not top of mind for everyone, but it's been top of mind for us for a long time. And Treat was the first token that was released specifically for use with FHE. And it's a huge use case. And why we're so excited about Treat and about FHE being part of the operating system that we built, because we know, SHIB, and when I say we in this case, we know the importance of FHE as it pertains to building a truly secure and private or semi-private network state and an operating system that can be used in a variety of applications. It's extremely important. And this becomes one of our core foundations and one of the reasons why we're so happy to have you as a partner. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about your experience as a CEO. In the last podcast we had a CEO from Ethermill join us, and we talked about like some of the challenges of being a CEO and kind of just giving advice that he had as a CEO to our listeners who may be starting their own business. And the reason I think this is so important to talk to CEOs and people who run successful businesses like yourself is because there are a lot of people out here now that AI has made creating a business and scaling that business cheaper and faster than ever that are going to step into this entrepreneurial mode, even though they've never done it before. So, one of the questions I like to ask is any advice that you could give to a new entrepreneur or a new founder of a project, that may be listening?
I spend a lot of time thinking about that actually. To give some background and context, I built my first company as a teenager. It was a social network back then. And I got it into AI when I was 18 back in 2003, did a PhD in AI in 2007 before it was cool, and then went on to build the first confidential AI company in Europe called Snips that got acquired back in 2019. And in 2020, I started Zama to work on homomorphic encryption. So AI, privacy, blockchain are things that I've been looking into for a very long time. And when I sold my previous company, I sat down and I thought about what would have I done differently and what should I do differently the second time around with Zama, right? Mm. And the one thing that came up at the top of my list, the number one thing is don't reinvent the wheel. I think when they start the first company the first time, they think that they have to innovate on every single aspect of building a company, on how to manage people, on how to do payroll, on how to do finance, on how to write contracts, on how to, you know what I mean? Like they're trying to reinvent everything. Mm. However, this is not your goal. Your goal as a company is to solve one major problem. And the only thing that you have to reinvent is the solution to that particular problem. So in the case of Zama, the problem is how do we fix privacy? The result is, homomorphic encryption. And so 100% of the effort we put into the company goes into making FHE work. Everything else, we just use whatever the other good companies are doing. And I think this is really, really important because otherwise you're going to spread yourself too thin. You're going to waste a lot of resources and mental bandwidth solving things which are not going to differentiate your company from everybody else. And I think, once you understand that, it's a massive, massive difference in velocity and in your ability to be successful.
That's a very interesting and insightful idea. Not reinventing the wheel, but there's something else you said that I think is important, and it was brought up in the previous podcast, and that was about passion. When you find that thing that you're passionate about, it makes it a lot easier for you to focus on that one thing as a company, not just sprawling your energy in multiple places because you're passionate about this and this and this and this. But if you find that one thing you're passionate about and that the company is trying to solve, you say, we are going to solve this one problem without question. This is our goal. This is our passion. This is what we do every single day. Then everything else is just standard. And that's actually a very intelligent piece of information. I'm happy that our entrepreneurs got to gain some knowledge from you there, because it's something that they can take with them to help make sure that they're successful in this new world of one man, $1 billion business. And, it's funny. There's the question right now of how long will it take for, I think Sam Altman asked this, how long will it take for a one person $1 billion valuation company? And they're kind of betting on how long this will take. And that's a very good question. But even then you have the same question, right? Of 90% of my business is standard processes, and that 10% is just me innovating in the thing that I'm passionate about. It's extremely interesting. I think as it pertains to this idea of FHE, a lot of people by now understand the importance of having their data encrypted and utilizing FHE in the future. And one of the things that we've done is been working with you on implementing this into the SHIB ecosystem and into our operating system. But I wanted to ask a little bit about where you see FHE going into the future. I know we had talked about HTTPZ, and if we can talk about that in this podcast and where that future, where we're going in this future.
The roadmap for FHE, at least the way we look at it at Zama, right, is we try to think about who needs it now and where could this be applied today. As I mentioned, I think LLMs, AI, is probably the most compute intensive thing that exists today. So if you can make AI work with FHE, it means that everything else on the planet that we're using can work with FHE. So I see LLMs and AI as the end game for homomorphic encryption, not necessarily the starting point. And the reason for this is just because it's just not possible yet. It would be just too expensive, and AI companies are not willing to bear the cost yet. So in the meantime, what we can already do very cost effectively and with very high performance is anything related to blockchain, and in particular, anything related to confidential payments, to the tokenization of finance, and to identity. And if you think about it, those three things, right? Finance, money, and identity are three of the most important things to actually do well and to do confidentially. And there's no way that finance is going to go on chain unless we figure out this confidentiality thing, right? So for us, the first step is, bring finance and identity on chain, finance, payment, and identity on chain with the confidentiality of FHE. Then on the back of that, start growing into other types of public services, company registries, land registries, cap tables, investment rounds, tokenize and put all that on chain with FHE. And then move outside of blockchain onto Web2 AI type of application. And so HTTPZ is this vision that eventually, the same way we went from no encryption at all with HTTP to encrypting data we're sending with HTTPS, we're now going to have end-to-end encryption with FHE and HTTPZ. And that is going to happen eventually. It's going to take a while, and we're going to start with blockchain, but eventually we're going to get there.
It's a powerful vision, and you heard it first here, maybe. When Shytoshi speaks to the idea of HTTPZ being a global standard to encrypt data in a futuristic way, and allow computation without decryption is extremely powerful. And in a new world where data is being passed in a variety of ways, specifically on blockchain, this becomes extremely important. And I am extremely excited to see it unfold over the next few years, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And that SHIB is a part of this revolution towards a new, safe and secure and private world. We have a few minutes left, Rand. I want to talk just more about your overall idea of where blockchain is going. So we've talked a lot about AI. We've talked about FHE. Where do you see this whole industry moving to, the Web3 world? Right now, everybody's so focused on just when is the next token going to pump? A lot of scams happening. But what do you think will happen overall in Web3 as FHE begins to take hold? Will this help lead institutions into the space? Because now they know that their information and their data can be safe? Or do you think that we'll have adoption from some of the bigger players like banks or, whoever, and Horowitz, et cetera, BlackRock, things like that? Or does this go in a different direction as we begin to see regulation?
Look, just finance is $100 trillion market. Okay. Finance wants to be on chain. It really wants to be on chain because it's the perfect technology for finance. Blockchain is meant for finance. Mm-hmm. The problem is they cannot afford to not have confidentiality and to have compliance. That's just the way the world works. Financial institutions, the bigger, the more compliant and the more confidential, these companies are. So today, the way to use blockchain is each bank has a blockchain and then they just talk to each other. But then what's the point? Like the whole idea of a blockchain is to have a shared ledger. If you no longer have a shared ledger, then, well, you're not really using a blockchain for what it's supposed to be. With FHE, you could actually put all of these assets, all of these things on a public blockchain like Ethereum or Solana and still have the same confidentiality guarantees that you would have with your own private chain. So we can bring all of finance on chain on top of public blockchain like Ethereum with FHE. That, I think, if you think about it, is absolutely gigantic. I'm convinced that, the next $20 trillion of tokenized assets are going to actually require confidentiality, and FHE is going to be enabling that.
We completely agree with you. And one of the beauties of the alpha layer that I've talked about in previous podcasts is that it's FHE enabled, allowing people to spin up their own rollup, which in actuality is a blockchain very easily, and have it be FHE enabled. So literally what you're talking about is what we're building. And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited, because this is a new way for the larger institutions to get involved in blockchain in a compliant and safe way. And I think that's something that was kind of missing. The idea that every single thing that happens on chain must be public has to change. That idea has to change. It doesn't in any way take away from decentralization. It doesn't in any way take away from the power of blockchain. It really just enables a higher understanding. And that's where this becomes really powerful and where the future meets the present. So, I'm so sad that we're out of time. There's so many questions I want to ask Rand. You're always so insightful and bring so much good information to us. If there's a listener out there that's interested in learning more about Zama, what's the best way to get in touch?
The best way is just to follow us on Twitter for now. Zama is at Zama_FHE, and myself at Rand, R-A-N-D, H-I-N-D-I.
Nice. And of course, Zama.ai is the website. And you'll be able to learn all about FHE and how you can implement it in your projects as we begin to roll out the beta test for the alpha layer and more FHE enabled projects for SHIB. And so again, thank you for being here, Rand, and thank you all the listeners who were here. It's always great to have you, Rand. I hope to have you again as you move forward with, I know there's lots of things coming in the pipeline for Zama, and I'm super excited just because I have some of that knowledge that I can't share right now. But we're happy to have you back and talk more when those things unfold. And until then, all of our listeners, have a great day. Thanks, Rand, for being here.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to the next time. Bye.